Caerligwylyd, October 937. Edra called her baby daughter Thyra, after her mother. She had suggested, in those early days of half-wakefulness, between semi-sleep and dazed wakefulness, that it should be Osrith, but Osrith reminded her adopted daughter that she had chosen the name from one of her ancestors, and given Edra her own birth name. "What do you think your mother might have called you?" "What was my mother's mother called?" Edra asked. Osrith didn't know. She knew very little of Utud's adopted family, from the time he had been taken from Bibbenberg, to the day he had arrived at the gates of his home with the head of their Uncle Elfric's servant in his hand. And she knew little of what he had done between then and seeing him in Winchester, warrior to King Alfred, married to Gisela, 2 small children. What about Anluf's family? Did he have sisters? What was his mother called? But Edra had settled on Thyra and all seemed well. "It is well?" Osrith asked half every day for next few weeks that she was not apart from Edra. She could be no better, half reassured her, and Osrith told her she often thought of her, on dark, lonely days, when, like her time at Caerligwylyd before, she had given up hope. "You did not give up on it," Half told her. "You had the wit, the determination to leave and find your king, like you have the desire to get back to the people who you love." "Beric?" she asked, when Osrith raised her eyebrows. "You would give up lands and titles here, in Cumbraland, to which you are more than entitled, enter into a paper marriage which you don't really want, all so you can go back to the land that you love." And then young Finan arrived through the encampments of soldiers who circled the perimeter of the citadel, waiting patiently, it seemed to Osrith, like a shoal of predators, for the time they needed to strike. And why hadn't they? The time was moving on, autumn was coming to an end. Constantine was still at Caerligwylyd, with his allies, and had not begun to turn south. Was he wintering here? Even to her that would seem far-fetched. Why assemble the armies here, on the border of the Roman wall, if he was going to send them home for the winter? It was Selarch, Constantine's son, who had escorted young Finan in through the 1,000 warriors, and Osrith had left the scriptorium and flung herself onto her son. He was road-weary, but defiant, and, after he had thanked Selarch and bade him give greetings to Constantine, told Osrith the news. And Caltigar could not defend Beric. Young Finan had given his mother an incredulous look and laughed once or twice, before turning away. How could a mere 50 men defend Beric against 500 of Ethelstan's men? 500? Osrith repeated. So he had done what he swore he would never do. Perhaps he had heard she had left Beric, then, heard she had gone to Bibbenberg. Gone to Caerligwylyd? Does Constantine know? Osrith asked, although she did not really want to know the answer. But she was too deep in the politics of it all to back out now, despite what she had said to the lords and the kings in Beric's hall. They walked in the autumn sunlight around the palisade, Osrith suppressing a yawn in the daylight, noting the warriors, going about their business of eating, polishing swords, practicing, all those things she had done when waiting, when dormant, watching for the first sign they were to be called. "How could you, mother?" young Finan chided, his face crumpled in despair. "Selarch tells me you acceded to the marriage with Domnall." He paused, as if waiting for her mother to deny it. When she didn't, he added, "Father fought with Uhtred. He was there at Ethelstan's side, all bending at his feet. Did you not think it was a good idea not to declare side, like you always said you would do?" "I am here for Edra's child," Osrith told him. "I had given up politics, so I can return to Beric. Whatever this battle is, I will not be there." She turned to her son, but her features betrayed anything but assurance. "You are frightened to go back," young Finan told her, imploring Osrith to listen when he guessed she might not. "With Constantine as your kin, we can get Beric back." "I don't want Beric back," snapped Osrith. "Not for me. I don't want land. I never have." She stopped walking and turned wearily to young Finan. "I thought ... That's what he wanted, my husband. Land and farming." She shook her head. "He mistreated too much. I miss my men, but Ethelstan's men have it now." "So, what?" young Finan told her. "I will go back and be the lady there." "And that's what Domnall says." "It's..." Osrith broke off. In truth, in all of those weeks since young Thyra was born, she had barely said 2 words to the man who was nominally her husband. "Then you need to Constantine, at least," young Finan told her. "There is something you need to know." And, as the story came out, as she stormed down in anger from the palisade and across to the hall, stalked furiously by the doors until the guards let her in, demanded and re-demanded that she see the King of Alba while young Finan counseled restraint for her emotions, Osrith finally understood. "Aethelstan's men hold it, but if I go back, I will secure Beric, for Alba," she told Constantine. His face had been impassive, and Osrith had furthered, "These are my lands, Domhnall's lands," she added. "They will kill the livestock and prepare for winter as they always do, but they are Pictish, Constantine, they were Sainids." How could she look at Mund, Caltigar, Rhea, all her people if she gave up on them? And, she was angry with Aethelstan. His promise to never invade was clearly not as strong as his loyalty to her brother, and she grew angrier still as Constantine, quietly, stoically, broke the news that, under Aethelstan's invasion, Uhtred was claiming Beric, because he can. Because he has Aethelstan's support, Constantine finished with. And the unpalatable truth. She threw her fists towards the flagstone floor and then kicked viciously at one of the chairs by the table that one of the kings had sat in, when she had denounced all claim to ruling. It skittered across the floor, knocking over an iron candle standard, which crashed to the stone loudly. Young Finan looked across to the king, glanced to Domhnall, then back to her mother. She was knelt, head bent into her arms, and her body shook with racking sobs. He backed away, looking for his cue on Constantine's face. The king frowned, then crossed the floor and knelt, taking Osrith's body in his arms, his body shaking as she released her pain and fear, anger and sorrow. No one could have done more. He spoke close to her ear, pressing the silver she had thrust at him on the birth of young Thyra into her lap. "When will you realize that you do not need to pay for the decisions you make?" She thrust it away angrily, her hair wild, her face red. And then she sobbed heartily, into Constantine's shoulder, as he held her gently. "Osrith, in time, you must find a way to forgive yourself for things that no one blames you for," he whispered by her ear. "God will find a way to show you." But it was anger at her own decisions that she could not get away from. Uhtred had taken Beric, as well as Bibbenberg. "I must fight," she told him, as Constantine looked over his shoulder to Domhnall. "Especially as Uhtred is gone from Bibbenberg." And she hated herself for ever going to her former home to encourage her brother to fight for the man to whom he had given an oath, for it was in that one action that had been her undoing, and the undoing of the people whom she loved. Osrith had trusted in Uhtred and he had betrayed her utterly. 888,888,888. But, Uhtred was not on the way to join Aethelstan, who was, on the border of Mercia, south of Manchester, not far east of Seaster, fighting hit-and-run warriors of Norse, Wynedians and Strathclydians. Instead, Uhtred had returned to Bibbenberg, taking the men with him and any women that wanted to come. He watched Benedetta packing to go, but refused to stop her. When she was ready, she gave Finan Osrith's letter. "She's gone then," Uhtred consoled. "To Constantine." "To Edra, Uhtred," Finan told him, pointedly. "You could beat her, get her back into line." Finan looked at Uhtred in utter confusion. "If she will not obey you?" "If she still believes I am her husband," Finan admitted, bitterly. For, he knew better than anyone that the law tied everyone together in Gaelish culture, and Constantine had taken advantage of this, as was his right. He had always hated Constantine, but in this, though his wife had probably been dispossessed from him, he hated himself for admiring the man. "What will you do?" "Leave her." "I have servant girls enough, you can have." "She deserves it." Finan looked at Uhtred. "Sometimes, I would beat you, Lord, for your pig-headedness. But I would never leave you." "Must you go, father?" young Uhtred asked, as horses neighed in the courtyard. "I trust you to command Bibbenberg," Uhtred replied. "And Osrith?" Young Uhtred looked across to Finan. He knew that Bergendagel had gone to spy, bringing back news of a mighty army amassing on the border of western Northumbria. He had told Finan that Osrith had been seen in the company of riders heading west, and that she had not come back nor north to Alba. Finan murmured, "She will not die by my hand," Uhtred replied, turning to look at his best friend. "But if she is fighting for Constantine, she could die, this you know. Ask her not to fight." Finan protested. "She will not fight when she sees your standard. Please Uhtred, I'm begging you." He held Finan's eye, thinking it over. "If you are being housed by a family, a servant to them, as he was with Ragnar the Fearless, you have loyalty to them, you have a home with them." And Finan had colluded to drown her after his brother had attempted to rape her as a young prince of the Alate, and he had sought to have her destroyed by Ethelwald, encouraged the man to do barbarous things to her. Then, he picked up his sword and made towards the carts that were heading to Seaster, where the skirmishes were at their most intense. "Do you hate her?" young Uhtred asked, suddenly, turning to his father. "No," Uhtred found himself saying. "I do not. I would probably have done myself everything she has done." "Even go back to your family?" Uhtred stared back at his son. "I tried, once. But my loyalty to Alfred swayed my mind in the end. I caused a rift between myself and young Ragnar, and Brida, she was never the same after his death. And if you had joined them, there wouldn't have been." Young Uhtred persisted. Uhtred turned his face to Finan and raised his eyebrows. "There would have been me against my Wessex friends. Then, Berwick is not her home and she clings to Bibbenberg out of loyalty. But her home is with Constantine. Her home is with her husband," Uhtred growled. "She is married to Finan, and—" But young Uhtred broke off, and looked down to the gate. A rider was coming. It was young Finan. "You are leaving?" he asked his uncle, circling on his horse as those who were leaving with Uhtred's company, including Benedicta and Elfberg, Sihtric's wife, packed their horses. He slid down, handing the rein to a servant and stepping over to his father. "We are to find Ethelstan," Uhtred told him. "Why have you come?" he asked, hostility in his voice. "I have come back to you," he told Finan, then looked back to Uhtred. "Constantine is heading south and tells me I must be with my father." "And your mother?" Young Finan seemed to consider this. "My mother is brave. I have seen her fight. She is better than a lot of men. She only went back to Caeligwylid because Edera was there, with Anlaf. She has given up any claim to the land, all claims." "Has she now?" Uhtred mused. "Including Berwick?" "Not Berwick." "And she is still at Caeligwylid?" Young Finan nodded. "And how will she claim Berwick, especially with Ethelstan's men occupying the land?" Young Finan chanced to look at young Uhtred, and then up the coast, in Berwick's direction. "She will not go to Alba, though Constantine has compelled her to. She cannot go to Berwick because, while Domnall was sent to be lord of the land, and she knows that Ethelstan's men occupy it." "In your name, uncle," he added, looking intently at his uncle, making sure Uhtred understood this. "Edward's bastard." Uhtred snarled, and took young Finan by the shoulders. "I do not claim Berwick, though I know Ethelstan knows I would have it if he offered." He looked across to Finan, who gave him a brief nod of agreement. "And that Uine Ealshot is to be the lord of Berwick?" Young Finan turned to look at him. But, before he could say anything, Finan pushed him away from him. "Then you should be with your father," Finan told him, harshly. "Your father?" He stabbed with his finger towards the north. "He lives up there, does he not?" "Ildub, you were baptized, were ye not? Ethelstan your godfather?" "And the Norse-Irish call you Indulf." There was nothing more to say. Young Finan merely looked between his father and his uncle, then got back onto his horse and rode away. Both men watched him go. "That was unkind. He looks just like you," Uhtred told Finan, as Bibbenberg's gates ratcheted up on the cogs. Was all Finan would say on the matter. He would be with his mother, back with his sister, Finan said as we were about to leave. "He is no warrior." "He is," Uhtred nodded. "He fights very well. Osrith taught him." "You taught him," Finan corrected his friend, "remember?" "And then he talked to Benedetta." "And then?" Utad glanced at his own gates before turning to his horse. He bolted up onto the saddle and rode fiercely from Bibbenberg. When he finally caught up with his nephew approaching the Great North Road, he called out to him. Young Finan did not stop at first, but, with Alnick ahead of him, he slowed. "You wish to see Alba again, boy? You wish to see Edra?" he asked him. "You'll do as you wish, uncle," young Finan said, obediently, "or what my father wants." He glanced back to Bibbenberg. "Finan is my father," he told Utad. "Constantine was good enough to adopt me, to all intents and purposes, when mother spied for him." It was the first time Utad has confirmed what he had long suspected. "He declared me to be Gaelish, and any Gaelish prince should take up residence at Dunnottar." "Your father would," began Utad. But young Finan jerked his head to Utad. "I have had enough. Constantine has been a father to me, without question. He has instructed me, guided me, educated me, and he had sought to protect mother. So she has accepted Domnall Uineel as her dower husband. Under Constantine's law." Utad nodded. That was what had got Finan. He suspected, strongly suspected, that Osrith had accepted what was incomprehensible to Utad. Even if he tried, the law did not make sense. But, Finan knew he had made a mistake, one almost unseen, like the breath of a wind. Intangible, but real. He felt sorry for Finan, so very sorry for his friend. "Then go to him, boy," Utad instructed, and young Finan turned again, whipping the rein of his horse. Utad watched his nephew until he was out of sight, passing over the hills beyond Alnick and onto the other side of the war. 88,888,888. It was night time, and Osrith had decided that she was leaving. Their warriors were going. It was clear that preparations were being made for the armies to leave. Food was being prepared and packed into wagons. Half had agreed, with payment of silver, because beyond everything, she was a heathen, and a heathen woman did not do anything without payment, to accompany Edra back to Alba. 3 warriors were going with them: Felim, Eswe and Harold Guthfrithson, Anluf's brother. It was the best Osrith could arrange. She had agreed to stay until the army had left and would go with Edra to Alba, and then on to Berwick. But now, in the early hours of the morning, she had changed her mind. Domnall had spoken to her about Berwick, and she had asked, formally, for his permission to go back there. "You don't need my permission, Osrith," he told her, the night that young Finan left, and she had been comforted by Constantine. They had walked the ramparts and they had talked, the first time since young Thyra had been born. "Although, I do think it would be dangerous for you." "I can look after myself," Osrith told her friend, now husband, nominally, at any rate. "I don't doubt it." Domnall hesitated. At the western rampart edge, 2 warriors, who had been sloping back onto the walls, stood up, smartly. "Why did you agree to the dower marriage?" "To me?" "Because you are a good man," Osrith told him. "Because there needed to be unity." "Because Constantine said so," Domnall accused. "Because Constantine is following a law so ancient it doesn't even feel like a law, it feels like our very existence. It is what is holding this alliance together." That was the last they had spoken about it. Now, she was going, and she had not even told Finolai about leaving. Because, she wasn't going north. She was going south. Out of the tower she crept, and down into the stable courtyard. Osrith had planned this for a few days and had located where Finolai had put her weapons, where new clothes were, where the best horse would be, all fed on high-starch foods for the long ride south, and she would be with them, not in their company, but close by, because this was one battle she was not going to watch, or hear about. Too many people, too many, were going to be involved with something so terrible that she had to be there, to fight. Osrith did not know when this thought had occurred to her, but when it had not just stuck in her mind, but grown, leafily, and loftily, until she could not do anything other than make a decision. Constantine would have to put up with it, everyone would have to put up with it. And she had made it through the unbarred gate with a piece of silver each to the guards, disguised as she was as a warrior, breasts bound, trousers on, armored. At first, she was challenged, and they asked why she was fleeing. Osrith went along with that. Because I don't want to die in some pointless fight when I could be at home with my woman keeping me warm, Osrith declared, slipping the guards more coins. And she decided to head west, following the Roman wall, in case she was spotted, and could feign some story about going to Bibbenberg to recapture that in her brother's absence, or the long way back to Berwick. But no one followed her. That was because there was someone waiting for her, at the first mile house to the west of Caerliguelid. Osrith dismounted when she saw that there was only one of them, holding Buay aloft so she could be seen clearly as a warrior. The enemy attacked. It was only at the last minute that she saw it was Domhnall. Osrith ducked and twisted out of his way. But Domhnall's own sword was away. He was waving a stick. Osrith, he called, when she stopped and turned. Domhnall, you were missing, from your room. Then I saw you bribe the guards. He held out a hand. In the early morning sunlight, the silver glinted. He took his other hand and held out Osrith's left hand and tipped the silver coins into it. How, you are running back to Berwick, he accused. But Osrith shook her head. I am going south. I was hoping to avoid being seen. To what will be the worst battle since before Ethand done? Domhnall replied, doubtfully. Everyone has a side to be on in this land. Everyone. There are no more petty alliances. I know, Domhnall, Osrith told him, putting away the silver. Which is why I chose to be a dowager. I had given up Finan for this, all of this war that could never be avoided. You still love him, Domhnall replied. I know you do. I have never seen love like it, except perhaps, between my mother and my father. Malmuir and Dfinedliath loved one another so very much that it seemed unreal when I was growing up. He looked past Osrith and to the stars, melting into the rising sun. About them, rain began to fall, quickly turning to a heavy shower. Domhnall took the reins of her horse and tied them to his, before tying them both to a tree. Come on, Osrith said, while it passes. Where were you going? Domhnall asked. South, Osrith told him, in the dry of the mile fort. Then you were heading in the wrong direction, Domhnall told her, with a small chuckle. No, really, Osrith told him, because I knew Constantine would never allow me to go with the army. And you never thought to ask me? Osrith looked at him in astonishment, feeling thoroughly foolish. To be his wife might have meant he would have said yes. And would you have agreed, if it had meant you were safe, Osrith? He told her. But, you are not my dower wife yet. What do you mean? Osrith asked, slowly. But, I agreed. She broke off. There was something no one was telling her. Constantine must have explained. His words were short, not like Domhnall at all. When she did not answer, he added, what do you think you had agreed to? To be your dower wife, to be under your protection, to be like Neil and Gormlath. And that is all? Domhnall shook his head. Constantine, he sighed, as if the king of Alba was with them. To be celibate, for the rest of our lives. Isn't that part of the arrangement? Yes, Domhnall said slowly, then looked away. No, Domhnall, Osrith insisted. I understood that our role did not involve us humping for our married life. Constantine didn't tell you? Domhnall chanced to look to Osrith, then looked away, and then back to Osrith, his face filling with anger. My bastard cousin ... he didn't tell you. His face looked agonized. Once. It has to be once. The whole of the advance south is dependent on this. Once, Osrith repeated. They had to hump once. And how will they know? Osrith demanded to know. I am not a maid. It won't be my first time. There won't be blood. Not that cannot be faked by the cut on a foot or some such wound. He will have my word, Domhnall told her. They looked at one another in silence for a moment. And the army cannot move south without your word that we humped. Nothing of what I said ... over a month ago ... my disregarding of my titles and lands ... is valid unless we ... hump once. And at once, all the bitterness and rage came to her. She ran. But Domhnall was too quick, and he barred the way. Surely not, Osrith thought, her heart beating quickly in her chest. Surely ... not after everything they had been through. There is a way out of this, she told him, I can give up Beric with no guilt in my head. How? Domhnall asked. The chill east wind pushing against the door which he was holding closed with his back. Are we in Alba? He stared at her. Are we? Or land that recognizes Brehon law? We are. This is a Roman mile house, he told her. Cymric country. Technically still yours. He watched Osrith back away, his face growing severe as she took off her sword belt, jerkin next and then shirt, bindings, which released her breasts to the cold morning air. Her nipples jumped away from them, standing pert, boots, then breeches, until she stood before Domhnall, naked. She had been naked before, but this was for a different reason. He had to hump her. Then, she strode to him, aggressively, took up his hand and put it to her breast, her nipple pressing into his palm. Domhnall pulled it away, sharply. Go, now, before it is too late. Domhnall told her. I need a way to give up Beric, and if it is yours, Constantine will do as he will anyway with the land. Domhnall scoffed. But Osrith was determined. It is not the point. I have looked after those people for nearly 20 years. I need to know they will be looked after. Osrith leaned up to kiss him then, and she could feel the effort he was making not to touch her was right. There was no passion there, but had there not been Finan, she might have acknowledged her old friend as her husband, found a way to be content as his wife. As she broke away, she drew up both of his hands to her breasts, gripping his fingers and making them grip around her nipples. It did not take long for them to get bigger from the attention, and Osrith pinched his fingers onto them, pulling them away, just as she liked them. Already she was getting wet. You must do this, Domhnall, she told him, but, when still he did nothing, she put her own hand to his. Osrith, he said, warningly. As Domhnall moved his hands away, she drew to her cunt. Within seconds, he was feeling deeply inside her lips her of his own volition, his erection stiff by her leg, her clit slipping between two of his fingers. Then he pulled away. You would dishonor me? Osrith demanded. I am that repulsive to you? He simply stared at her. She made to approach him again. Let me tell you, you tempt me greatly, Osrith, but I know where your heart lies. There at Seaster, there, or thereabouts will be the great battle. But her lips were on Domhnall again, determined to do what was needed, and this time, he held her to him, her body pressing close to hers, his body responding to the touch of her. Domhnall's cock was hard by her leg, and just when Osrith thought that he would consummate their dour marriage, as decreed by Constantine's law, when she thought he would slip it out, and into her cunt, he backed away. No, Osrith, he declared, pain in his voice as he spoke to her, his breath uneven, his hair disheveled. Osrith, he warned, as she stepped to him again. Get out of here, before I can say no to you again. They are at Seaster, he added. The dour marriage is consummated, as far as Constantine is concerned. Osrith said nothing, as Domhnall fought to regain composure. As God is my witness, you are the best friend a man could ever have, but I cannot despoil you, Osrith, who I consider a sister, much that my lust would desire you. Go, marry the unlaid bastard, properly this time, in the law of the Southern King. And those were the last words Domhnall ever said to Osrith, for instead of Osrith leaving, it was he who left first, Domhnall of the Uineal, striding from the Roman mile house, unfastening his horse, and not stopping once to look back.